And do you remember when you first heard about the Women's Encampment for a Future of Peace and Justice?
I do, yes. I was living at Greenham Common, and it was May, June in 1983, and an invitation had been sent over for Greenham women to come to the opening of the Peace Camp in July.
How did they select the women?
I have no idea. I don't know how they selected us. I remember I'm sure there were meetings about it, but they selected me and Cassie White and Barbara, I can't remember her last name, Gordon I think, and we came together. But I don't know. I don't remember there being a big sort of thing about who was going to go or not go.
But do tell us about Greenham Common and how you got involved there and what that was like.
Well, I got involved because a local peace group was, I think it was the December the 12th action, and lots of people came from all over the country to go to Greenham, and my local CND group got together and came down on the bus, and it was like a surround the base thing. So thousands of people came, and we had a huge discussion about whether it should be men and women, which was completely new conversation for me. But I came down and loved it. I think I arrived at what was the main gate then, later became Yellow Gate, and saw all these women and some woman with a walkie-talkie, and just everybody was kind of looked really powerful and interesting, and I was so excited by it that we went home, and I said to my mum, I have to go back. I was 17, I was at school, and I was in the middle of my final year of exams with a plan to go to college, but I left school, packed everything up and came back down, I think just after Christmas, maybe Boxing Day, something like that. Wow. And my mum drove me down actually, and we built a little tent, and that was it. I stayed, and at that point the silos action was being discussed, the one where the women went over the fence and occupied the top of one of the missile silos, and I wanted to do that. So I think I just kind of plunged myself into the whole thing and loved it and loved being there, and did the action, which was incredible, and got arrested and kind of was part of the whole thing from then onwards.
Can you tell us what CND is, and then would you be willing to give us, like, set it up for us? What was Greenham Common? What was the Air Force Base? What did you know about crews at that time? What did it mean to have the U.S. missiles? What understanding did you have of any of that?
CND is a campaign for nuclear disarmament, so it's a British movement that had existed probably since the 50s or 60s, and it was specifically about nuclear disarmament, and it was a broad group with kind of all sorts of people involved in it. Traditionally left, so traditionally came from a left or Quaker, or so that kind of background. And I can't remember what else you asked. But what Greenham was, what the base was, the base was a American Air Force base. So there are a number of American Air Force bases in England. I think probably because it's a long way to fly if you want to bomb somebody and you're coming from America. You need a few stopping off points. So there were a few bases, and Greenham was one of them, and we knew that it was due to receive nuclear missiles in the form of crews, and so the protest had come, the camp had come about by a march from Cardiff to the base as a protest march, and the women who were on that march decided to stay, and the camp had been set up I think in 1982. I might have the dates wrong, but that's my understanding of it.
Did you know about the march at the time?
No, do you know, I don't think I did know about the march at the time. I didn't know really the history of it until I got down there, and I only knew because I used to go to, my family live up in Cumbria in a very small place, and there was a local peace group, and I attended it, went to it, and just heard of the December protest through that group and wanted to go. So yeah.
And the process for crews to be deployed at Greenham, do the people have a chance to vote on that? Is there a process in England about how those decisions are decided?
I don't think so, no. I mean, I'm sure it would have been a you know, there's obviously a link between British military and American military, but I think, I'm not sure I was going to say, I think the Americans could do what they want in their base, but the British military police were involved in the policing of the base. There was obviously a cooperative relationship around how it was to be used, but there was no referendum, it was not part of a vote or...
So Becky, had you heard that women were encamped?
Oh yeah.
You had heard about
yeah,
that part.
Not much, but yes.
Yeah.
But there were a number of peace camps. There was one at Aldermaston, and
right.
So I think they were relatively new, but yeah, I knew that there were protests.
What was Aldermaston?
It was a nuclear research. I can't remember much about it, I'm afraid.
And where were you living at the time when you went to Greenham?
I was living in Kendal, well not really, but just outside, which is up in Cumbria in the northwest of the country, just underneath the Scottish border, and going to school and doing my exams.
And did your mom go with you to that first action, them surrounding the base?
Do you know, I don't remember. I don't remember anyone with me. I just remember sort of being there and seeing somebody who I later knew and was friends with, just who looked amazing. It was the first time I'd seen anybody who was a lesbian, so that was like, bloody hell. And just seeing women organising it all and seeing the scale of it. I remember having all these meetings up in Kendal about whether men should come, and I had no kind of consciousness around separatism or separate space or anything like that. So I was like, of course the men should come. But then having got there, I thought, hang on a minute, this looks amazing. So yeah, I think it was good that the men didn't come.
So when you went back, it was winter time.
Yeah, I went back. It was winter time. It was December.
Tell us a little bit about living in those conditions. What winter was like there, and what it took to stay.
I mean, that was probably a quite stable time for the camp at that point in late '82 and all. Certainly for bits of 1983. So we had, did I bring a tent, or I made a tent, something like that? It was cold, I remember it was cold, but I came from a very cold part of the country, so I was quite used to the cold. I was quite used to being outside. I loved living outside, and we had fires. We had a couple of fire pits that we were always kept going, and I just wore a lot of clothes and we had a lot of blankets. I don't remember it being sort of terrible or awful or anything. So, I mean, yeah, I don't remember particularly being uncomfortable.
Cool.
I think it was, yeah, it suited me. It suited me, and it, you know, England gets cold, but perhaps not as cold as here. So, I mean, there were very cold winters, but...
Describe the setting, describe where the camps were in proximity to the base. Where did you drive up? Were there cars? How did it work that way?
Well, we took a bus and parked along the road. The base occupied what had previously been common land, which meant that everybody should have had access to it, and it's, I think, or I remember it as particularly beautiful heathland with a lot of birches and open grassland and stuff, so it was lovely. And the narrow strip of that land was still left around the base, and at Main Gate there was there had been, the Welsh women had had caravans, and I think there had been an eviction preceding the December thing, and loads of gravel had been dumped on the site, so there were lots of gravel mounds, and that was to stop caravans, which was, I think, possibly why it all became tents and benders and things like that. So it was a kind of open space in a quite narrow strip of land between quite a busy main road and a little side road that led into the base and the gates of the base, and the camp was on both sides of the little access road, with more kind of benders and tents on one side, and the fire pit and the communal kitchen area and all of that on the other side of the road. And there were tall poplar trees that we would string rope between, and build the polytunnels. So when we had lots of people staying, you could kind of quickly rig up.
What was a
Big space.
polytunnel?
Just a sheet of plastic over a rope, and then you'd have pallets and bedding inside. So
And women would sleep.
women would sleep there. Yeah.
And then at that point, were there camps at any other gate, or was that only Yellow Gate?
I think that Green Gate was set up quite soon. When I first came, I think it was just Main Gate, and Green Gate and Orange Gate set up around the same sort of time. And Green Gate was the gate that the works traffic would go in, because it was the nearest gate to the silos. And Orange Gate, I think they often came out of Orange Gate because it was quite orange and then later blue, because they were both quite close to the runway, is my memory. I'm sure some other green woman will tell you something different, but that's what I
You're our
remember.
only green woman, don't worry.
Yeah.
How far was Green Gate from Yellow Gate?
Oh, yeah, no, you'd walk it in about 20 minutes or something around the fence. But it's quicker to walk around the fence than it was to walk around the road. The
And
base wasn't huge, it was 9 miles all the way around.
And Orange Gate in proximity to Yellow Gate?
Similar, you just walk left for Green Gate and right for Orange Gate. Probably very similar.
And how many women were they around at that time?
Well, you know, there must have been quite a lot. I'm sure lots of people came for the action and stayed or came back like I did, and certainly when we were planning the silos action, I think something like 40 of us got arrested, and there were still plenty of people in camp. So I think there was a good amount of women there, somewhere between 40 and 60, I'd guess. And more came, you know, people would come at the weekends, or people would come and go, and so yeah.
How did you have food and water and bathrooms and all of that? How did you do that?
Food, there were lots of food that was bought as donations, and there was lots of money that was given as donations, and so we would buy food or be given food, and a lot of us signed on and had unemployment benefit, and so then the food, you know, people would buy food like that. Water, there was a standpipe down at the road which we would use to fill big containers of water. Bathroom, I think we had chemical toilets. And then, do you know, I have no idea what happened to it all. I never emptied the shitter, so I don't know where it all went. I mean, I collected firewood a lot. I spent a lot of time collecting firewood, some time cooking and stuff like that. But
How did you keep the fires burning? It was from wood on the land, or did people bring wood?
people bought wood, and we collected wood because a lot of it was forest or it was woodland with dead, fallen trees as well as living ones, obviously. But so yeah. I don't remember there being a problem with wood, but people must have donated it, because I do remember sort of getting a telegraph pole, which was great because they burn for ages and they're quite satisfyingly large. So yeah, and we'd cook on the fires, so we'd cook on the open fire.
Where did you store food or supplies?
I don't know. I mean, there was a kitchen area where there was some food, obviously. A couple of people had vans, so maybe we put some in there. I don't think we had huge amounts of stores. I think it was a little bit more hand to mouth, not ridiculously so, but I don't remember sort of having vast bins of food. I think that would have just been a bit cumbersome anyway, you know.
And what about evictions? Was that happening, or was that later?
At that point it wasn't. There'd been that big eviction before, but I don't remember evictions starting till much later.
So this is still 1982?
This is the end of 1982, yeah.
So can you talk about, you said you were a part of the Silos Action. Can you tell us about what that was, how it was planned, and what you did?
It was the idea of somebody called Eleanor, who had wanted us to go climb onto the silos on New Year's Eve, and as a kind of protest. And we had lots of discussions about how we were going to do it, and we didn't know whether the soldiers would be armed or not, so there was some anxiety that we'd all get shot, and so there was a whole discussion about whether we should wear kind of some outfit that identified us as non-violent, or obviously we weren't invading the base as in a state of war. And there was a lot of discussion about me and another woman who was 15 because of our age, and whether it was responsible to have a group where some of the people in it were so young and walking into a situation where something terrible might have happened. And I managed to make the cut, but the 15-year-old didn't. And I remember I can't remember where we climbed over the fence. We'd staked the whole thing out where we were going to go over, how we were going to go over. We had carpets put over the barbed wire. We went and sat in the bushes for ages. We had to wait until just about dawn because we wanted people to be able to see it. And I think we had a reporter from the Observer with us, which is a big link to the Guardian. It's a big sort of lefty but national newspaper, and they were there. And as you saw in Carrie Greenham Home, Beban and Amanda were there with cameras as well. And so we were all really, really, really quiet. And then I think the Observer guy took a picture, and so there was a flash. And so it kind of what I remember is it slightly changed the timing of it, because I think we thought we'd been seen. So it all then sort of became very hurried, and I remember kind of climbing up the fence and hitting the ground the other side, thinking the silos are really far away and it was really muddy, and just starting to run and feeling people running around me, and I could sort of feel or see the police over to one side, but we just kept running and running and running, and then we got to the silos. It was like they were really tall. We hadn't really planned how we were going to get on top of them. We just sort of arrived at them, and it was kind of a wall, and we climbed up. I remember scrambling up, and then that circle that you see sort of looks quite calm, but at the time it wasn't really. I felt not breathless because I'd run, but breathless because of the kind of extraordinariness of it, and just being out in the air and running, and the monstrous thing, and climbing up, and then we were all a bit hysterical. And then the police came quite quickly, I think, after that, and there were obviously no guns and no anything, but they dragged us down off the top. I can't remember much after that, except for we all ended up in different police stations, and it was all over the news. The pictures were all over the news, and everybody was talking about it, which was great. And I don't know if the camp put out a statement, because I think I spent the next 2 days in the police station, so I can't really remember what happened after that. But it was a big deal. It was a big deal.
Tell us what the silos were.
The silos were where the missiles were going to be stored. So they were to be fired off launchers, which were basically giant trucks, which would drive wherever they needed to drive to set off a bomb. And but this is where they were to be stored. So they would, I don't know if they could have launched them from there, I suppose, but it was more of a storage thing.
And how many silos were there?
I don't know, maybe 3 or 4. I remember getting into one of them at one point. We broke in and went round one. It was just concrete and emptiness, but I can't remember.
Were they joined together, the silos?
No, they were sort of, they look, I don't know if you have seen that film, but they're kind of a sort of flat-topped, low kind of hill, but there were at least 3 or 4 of them, I'm sure. They may have been joined together underground, but not visibly so above ground.
The picture in my mind is of you all dancing.
Yeah, so that was one, and then the rest kind of looked exactly like that. I think that was probably the nearest one, the one we could get to the quickest. But yeah, they were all in that area though.
Had you been inside the base before that action?
No, I hadn't. No, that was my first civil disobedience, really, I think.
And do you remember anything about did you have to come before the magistrate? Did you have to spend time?
Yeah, it was a huge court case, and again, it got massive publicity, and the courtroom was packed, and the outside was packed, and it's quite hard to have 40-something defendants in court, so I don't think we weren't in. They had to sort of rearrange the court for us, and we were charged with something called breach of the peace, which was a civil offence rather than a criminal offence, and found guilty, of course. And we were then asked we were bound over to keep the peace. So we could have walked away at that point and gone, yes, I agree to be bound over to keep the peace, and that would be the end of it. Off you'd go, no further consequences. But all of us, I think not all of us, but most of us, 30 at least something people, said, but I am keeping the peace. This is my way of keeping the peace. So those people were sentenced to 2 weeks in prison, and I was one of those people, and I got shipped off to Holloway Women's Prison. But I was very young, so they didn't quite know what to do with me. They couldn't put me in the main part of the prison, so they put me in the mother and baby unit, which was quite odd, but slightly more humane, I think, possibly. So,
wow. And you were really young to be participating in that action. In the court case, was it scary at all, or did you feel so supported?
I did feel very supported. I mean, the amount of people that were there, and we had, a lawyer who was kind of passionate about political action, who was really on our side, and yeah, I felt completely supported. Did I feel scared? I think I felt scared in prison. I did feel scared at first in prison, because it's quite a process, going into prison, and the kind of taking away of your identity by taking your clothes away or doing the strip search or all of that. That's quite an experience. And also, they didn't move me to the mother. What I remember is they didn't move me to the mother and baby unit straight away. They moved me to part of the prison which was quite overcrowded, and they had, in a single woman's cell, they had 3 people, and I was the 3rd person. And I arrived there, and I was obviously a dyke, and that, short hair, big boots, and that was one of the first questions that I was asked. Are you a dyke? And I thought, I don't know what to answer. Do I answer no and it's fine, and then what? Or do I say yes and get my head kicked in, or what? So I just thought, fuck it, I'm just going to have to say yes. And they were completely fine. Everybody was fine, But just remember that sort of entry into it was quite frightening. But actually, once in prison, the kind of overwhelming feeling about prison, mostly for me, is that it's quite boring. There's not much to do, and you don't have any real freedom of movement. So it's mostly boring, prison. But it's amazing to meet women from all over the place and to begin to get a sense of who is it that ends up in prison, particularly for women. Women were being sent to prison for things that I suspect men would never have been sent to prison for. So everybody's in there for crimes to do with money and not having enough money, and so they're all to do with checks and shoplifting and stuff like that. So that was quite interesting. It was a bit of an eye-opener for me, coming from a very small place, to see that.
How did your mom, what was her reaction to the action in your imprisonment? Do you remember?
Yeah, she was completely supportive. I think since I've talked to her a bit, and she has always said, well, you were always going to do what you were going to do, so I had to just kind of support you, really, because I don't think it would have made a difference, except we would have been in conflict, and it wasn't her thing. And she believed in what we were doing anyway, even if at that point she wasn't involved. She did believe, and then later, a few years later, she came down and lived at Greenham herself, so it wasn't separate from her politics. I think she's never said, so I don't know, but she might have been anxious about the process and would I be all right in prison and all the rest of it. But I think she came and was outside Holloway for a while as well. I can't remember, but yeah, entirely supportive, so good, all good.
Were there many other young women as young as you at Greenham?
Yeah, I think there were. I mean, there was the girl who was 15, who was probably the youngest woman, but there were certainly women my age. I probably amongst the youngest there, but I don't think I was necessarily the youngest, or me and then a huge gap and then everybody else in their 20s and 30s or 40s and 50s and onwards. So I remember sort of peer group, definitely, but people were more mixed anyway. So,
and there was such a range of ages.
There was such a range of ages. Yeah, there was women
Were
in
there
their
children
70s.
there?
There were children there. Yeah, there were quite a few children there, and there was one baby born during the time that I was there, born in one of the benders, which
Wow.
was amazing. We all boiled a lot of water. I'm still not quite sure why, but boiled a lot of water endlessly, get more boiling water. And what was amazing is that she, the woman Sarah who chose to give birth, allowed us all to see. So the side of the bender was open, and two women were helping her, holding her up, and we had a woman who lived at the camp who was a midwife. So we all were there and were kind of as involved as you can be, so, which was incredible.
Wow.
But children lived there, yeah, quite a few children lived there. Not all the time, but yeah, maybe people, I don't know. I wasn't really kind of aware of things like the law around children in school, but anyway, there were kids there.
And it was easy for you to leave school at that point?
It changed my life leaving school at that point, I think, really. I think I had a place to go on and study fine art, and that's possibly the one thing that I regret, is that I never got a chance to do that. I was doing my A-levels. They even agreed to take me without my end of year exams. They were happy to take me just on the basis of the work that I'd shown them. And I never took the place up, so I don't regret Greenham, I don't regret any of it, but I do sort of think, oh, that was one path missed that I perhaps would have loved. But anyway, there were others, so.
Many other things.
Many other things. I suppose it's always like that, aren't there? There's a million paths you could follow and you choose one.
Yes. So, how long were you at Greenham?
Do you know, I think that I lived there pretty much all the time for about 18 months to 2 years, I think. And then I think that I probably spent the next 18 months coming and going more. So I had a sort of solid time there. I remember living through at least one winter, possibly two winters. And then, yeah, because I lived through that 83 winter, then you came and we lived through the 85 winter, but I was starting to come and go more then and spending time in London, a week at the camp, a couple of weeks in London, that sort of, so by then I'd kind of was dipping in and out more.
Can you tell us about, as time went on, how the actions went, and did the police attitude change? Did the military change as far as how they treated?
I think it's quite mixed. In one way, I think they became more violent. But it, you know, when you live somewhere and you see the police day to day and the same faces day to day, there is some kind of connection between you and relationship between you, even if it's, you know, you're provoking them or they're being arseholes. You know, there was some kind of connection. But I think with bigger actions and evictions where they bust police in, then it's a different story, because you've got hundreds of police from all over the area with no connection, who are walking away and no consequence tomorrow. They're not policing the area, they're just being brought in to deal with you. And certainly as time passed, what was going on in England at the same time or similar time was the miners' strikes and the pit closures, and some of the women had connections with the pit closures and would go up to demonstrations there, and policing really changed in the 80s, I think, in England, and became much more combative, and they were quite happy to sort of appear in force and throw people around. So I think it evolved. Getting arrested inside the base, I don't think there was ever. I think the MOD had a slightly different approach, and also you're not dealing with it on the same scale. You know, one or two people you're arresting rather than trying to shift 50 women out of the way. Or
And were there constant actions?
It's funny, isn't it? If you live somewhere, it doesn't feel like there's constant actions, I think, because there's definitely the day-to-day of living as well. But yeah, I think there were a lot of actions and a lot of sort of us being annoying in a low-level way by removing small bits of fence, or deciding we were going to block the gate, or putting the lock on the gate so that they couldn't get out, or, you know, those sorts of little things that weren't really planned, but people would just think, do you know what? I'll go and do something. So I think there was quite a lot of spontaneous just going to do stuff. And yeah, I don't remember planning lots of things. We planned some things. We planned things like the Silos action, obviously. We planned the Teddy Bears picnic. We planned other things.
Tell us about the Teddy Bears picnic.
The Teddy Bears picnic was, I think it was on my 18th birthday. This is what I remember about it. Although, you know, somebody else might say something different. I'll just drop my earring. And we dressed up as teddy bears, or I was the back end of a pantomime cow and my friend was the front end of a pantomime cow, and we were going to go and have a picnic on the base. And we had us a whole song which I can't remember, but anyway, there was that. And so yeah, we climbed over the fence. I remember actually managing to sit down and pretend we were having a picnic, and then by which time the police all arrived and arrested us and took us away. I don't think we got charged though. I think they just threw us out. I think they were just like, just chucked us.
People were all in costume.
People were all in costume, yeah. So there was like a giant panda and a giant, well, a cow. I was half of a cow. I think there was a pink rabbit with big ears. There was Micah dressed up as a rabbit. Lots of outfits.
What's the point of such a silly thing?
I think to bring some lightness to it, to bring some playfulness to it, and that I think that, you know, living at Greenham, and kind of, we always wanted it to kind of be fun, and that it couldn't be this sort of dreary trudge through the mud to weep at the gates. You know, that it needed to be fun, it needed to be a laugh, it needed to be about creativity and imagination, and not, you know, yeah, we're all going to die, and we said that plenty of times, but you can't, you know, how long can you bang on about that? You've got to, you know, just have life and bring life to that space, and bring playfulness to that space, and take the piss a little bit, you know, try and disarm people.
And did they get the humor of it?
Yeah, I think they did actually. I do think that the police did get the humour of it. I think, you know, if it had been me working as a policeman, I would have probably spent a lot of time trying not to laugh and trying to pretend to be serious, because it was very silly some of the time. So I'm sure that they got the humour of it, but I don't think that they demonstrated. I don't remember anybody laughing, but I also don't remember anybody being really mean or aggressive. It was all quite gentle, that whole thing. I think we just sort of herded towards the van and then dropped somewhere. I don't think we were charged.
Was there a lot of support from the town? Newbury, or what was the closest town?
Newbury was the closest town. I think it was probably about 3 or 4 miles away. Mixed, actually. There were 2 or 3 people who lived locally who were amazing. A woman called Evelyn, a woman called Lynette, and a woman called Barbara, and they were incredible. They would let, you know, women go to their house and have baths, because of course we didn't have any hot water or anywhere to bathe, so you could go and get a bath. And I think there was a Quaker meeting house as well. I think Newbury had a Quaker house, and so that was a kind of safe, dry, clean place. So a few people were incredible, and a lot of people weren't. A lot of people didn't like us very much, and were pro the base. Newbury, and certainly that kind of part of England, is quite conservative.
Did local people work at the base?
No, I think I know that was the case more in Romulus, that it was about jobs as well, wasn't it? That relationship with the base was about employment in the area, and I don't think, you know, Americans brought money in the shops a little bit, but they had their own stores on base anyway, and so I don't think many people worked in the base.
Right.
There must have been contractors working in the base building the silos, but I would have thought that that was a kind of business relationship rather than lots of local people having jobs that were dependent on the base. But, you know, I'm not sure if that's true, but I have no memory of it being about jobs.
Yeah.
It was about, we were all lesbians, it was all filthy. Of course we needed missiles because the Russians were going to kill us any minute, you know. So I think it was more about people were opposed to us for those reasons rather than employment, I think.
Do you remember anything about, or have any, about Greenham's part in the nuclear, like C&D or the nuclear movement at large in England, like what part it played or how you interacted? Did Greenham women interact like in London or in other settings around nuclear disarmament?
There was another peace camp, I can't remember where it was, quite nearby. I remember driving there. So I think there were links to other peace camps. And there was a support network, not only in London, but in places like Leeds and Sheffield, where there was big sort of feminist and anti-nuclear kind of movements already. But I think it probably felt, it was difficult because I was so immersed in it and so young that I didn't necessarily have all the context, and I didn't really have any links to London at all because I wasn't from the south. I didn't know anyone in London. I don't think I'd even ever been to London, so, you know, my connections would have been northwards if anything. But actually it was just, so I don't know, I'm not sure I know the answer.
How about international? Like, were there women that you
Lots of women came
across some,
yeah,
like from where? What
yeah, women came from Comiso and stayed, and we went to Comiso. I remember going to Comiso, and
what can you?
it was similar. It was a similar thing, but based in Sicily. It was an American Air Force base due to receive missiles, but I'm not sure what part of. I don't know if they were refueling or something. There was something different about them. I can't remember. And so we went and stayed there, and they came and stayed with us. I remember some women from Sweden coming. So there was definitely a toing and froing with other European camps and other European protests. The Italian women, obviously, there's some women from Holland came. So, and we would go outwards as well. I remember going to Finland when I was with somebody else, can't remember who, and doing a whole sort of series of talks in Finland about Greenham. So yeah, there were connections all over Europe. A couple of German women lived at the camp. Yeah.
And that early on, were there US women? The early year?
Yes, I think so. Not many, but yes. Couple just singly turned up, not as part of an organised protest that I remember, but as perhaps women who happened to be in England anyway, or I don't remember people coming as in we've come to represent an American movement or an American camp or anything. I just remember individuals.
And was there general sense about the US at Greenham in England?
In what way?
Like the fact that missiles would be there, or the U.S. people, or the U.S. government? I mean, was there a common way of thinking about that?
I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, without being rude, Ronald Reagan seemed like a sort of cartoon, and so my sense of kind of American politics was that it was being run by somebody who was a lunatic or somehow laughable. But I don't think I had a really deep understanding of American politics, and I had no experience of American culture or cultures or any of it. Yeah, I think there was just a sense that there was somebody who had their finger on a trigger, and that person was foolish in some way, or, you know, do you know what I mean? But I don't think I knew much. I don't think I knew that much. I think I was really a creature of instinct rather than at that point, rather than kind of having a deep analysis of anything. I just kind of went on what I felt.
Did you think that that would have been possible for the presence at Greenham to that would result in the missiles not coming?
Yeah,
You did think so?
yeah.
Say something about that.
Well, I think we all believed it. We all believed that if we were there, we weren't just there as an alternative view, we were there to stop the missiles coming and believed that we would stop them from coming. So I think seeing them arrive, which I did, was kind of devastating. I remember the day they arrived and how devastated we were, but ultimately I think in the end they went, and we did, and I feel that we were a part of that. We weren't all, you know, there was an end to the Cold War, there was politics outside of us, but I think we were all part of that. But yeah, no, we totally believed we were going to prevent them from coming, and that's why we were in the road. That's why we were lying in the road, to physically stop things from happening.
Tell us about the day that they came. Did you know ahead of time?
Yeah, we did. I've no idea how, but I remember them being driven in, and I remember it being quite chaotic. I remember driving around. I'm sorry, it's vague, but I do remember them coming. I remember how distressed everybody was. I have a memory of a blockade that was then, somebody got their arm broken by the police, but I can't, it's quite chaotic. Sorry, my memory of it all is more
What
general.
did you guys do in response? Did they come into Yellowgate? Did they actually
No, they
try?
didn't come into Yellowgate. I think they came into Orangegate.
And you women gathered?
Women gathered. I think we did. They didn't. No, they were flown in. They were flown in. Planes came down, and we saw the planes. We were standing by the fence and saw the planes come down. So there was a lot of singing, and obviously lots of people keening and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, you can't block the roads because they're, you know. But there was some kind of blockade, because I just remember it all went a bit wrong with the police. But anyway, sorry, a bit vague.
And after that, was it like the letdown you said you experienced? Did that make you not want to be there? How did that affect you and your commitment to Greenham?
It might have made me not want to be there. I'm not sure if it was the only thing, but I think it probably had an effect. I think if you believe something and want to try and prevent it, and then that thing happens, kind of one of the main purposes of you being there just isn't there anymore. So
When did that happen? Do you remember time-wise? How long you had been there?
no.
Had you been to U.S. by then?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So you'd
I
already
think
been
so.
over to Seneca and
Yeah.
come back.
Yeah. Yeah, because Seneca was an attempt to prevent them from leaving here.
Can you talk a little bit about how decisions were made at Greenham? Was there a way that just life, day-to-day decisions were made? How did things happen? Meetings, gatherings? How was information passed?
Yeah, I mean, not sort of as intensively as here, definitely. There were some meetings. There were meetings about money and how to spend money and how to share money. Because there were some women that had no access to any money, and so the camp would give them a small amount of money, and so there's decisions about that. I don't remember big meetings about actions, because I remember them being quite organic, and that somebody would just go, do you know what, I'm going to go and do blah, and other people would get involved. I don't remember there being lots of meetings about that.
Could you do whatever you wanted, or was there a basic thing that you had to respect as part of the group? Or did people get pissed off if women did things they didn't think were appropriate? Do you remember?
I don't know. I don't know if people got pissed off. I didn't experience anyone being pissed off, and I think you could do whatever you wanted, but it had to essentially be non-violent, and presumably you had to be prepared to deal with the consequences of it. And so I never had a sense that, you know, people did things that other people disagreed with, but maybe they did, I don't know. But, you know, cutting the fence or going in, people seemed to celebrate that, and the fact that it was spontaneous and unpredictable was part of who we were and the spirit of the place. So yeah, I don't remember lots of meetings.
Were you arrested at Greenham after the silo action? Were you ever arrested?
I was probably arrested, I don't know, countless times, for at least 5, 6, 7 times for various things. Another breach of the peace, I think, some obstruction, which was to do with blockades, and criminal damage, which was to do with painting things and paint bombing things.
Painting what thing?
I painted a missile launcher
Inside the base?
outside the base. It stopped. We had waited in the bushes. They had gone on some exercise, and we waited in the bushes, and for some reason it stopped to make the turn. You were there. And I ran, and I didn't really plan it, but suddenly I hadn't sort of thought about what I was doing until I arrived right next to the vehicle, and it was easier to climb up on it than anything else, so I climbed up on it, and I think we put paint on it, didn't we? And then it drove into the base and I was still on it, which was a bit of a nightmare, but anyway. I didn't get charged for that, actually.
So you weren't arrested?
Not for that, no. But I was for various other things. I remember painting things inside the base and paint bombing something and hitting a policeman by accident.
From the trees,
climbing up a tree, yeah.
So by that time, the missiles were leaving the base, or the convoy was leaving the base?
The convoy was going out for practices on Salisbury Plain, which is nearby.
Yeah, describe that process, what that was.
The launchers would go out with a lot of other vehicles with them, and there was a huge telephone tree that people from Greenham would phone other people who would phone other people, so there was actions all along the way, I think, and so we kind of knew where they were and when they were coming back-ish. It was weird because nobody had mobile phones, so I'm not quite sure how it all worked, but anyway, somehow it worked. Yeah, and they'd go off and do a little practice, and then I'm not sure if it was the next day or a few days later, they'd all come back and we'd be waiting for them and try and interrupt their return or protest or throw eggs full of paint at them or that sort of thing.
And so once the cruise was deployed there, what was the purpose of, you stayed on obviously?
I think, I don't know, I suppose. I didn't stay on much longer, a little longer, to interrupt the exercises around the launches, to, I suppose, present an alternative world and an alternative kind of presence, and to carry on sort of protesting, really. But yeah, I don't know. I don't remember anybody sitting down and going, why are we still here? You know.
So you mentioned the women that were filming for the film what became Carrie Greenham Home. Do you remember them being there? Can you talk about that process? And
I don't know. Amanda and Beban were at a film school in London, and this was their student piece. So, but they must have had a conversation saying, "We're coming. Is it all right?" And I think because they were women and because they immersed themselves in camp life, they didn't sort of drop in and film from the outside. They definitely filmed from within and were one of us. You know, they'd be around the fire in the cold and having rubbish spaghetti sauce, and you know, like the rest of us, they lived there with us. I mean, obviously they went home and they edited and they came back and got a bit more, but they definitely felt like they were part of us, and so there was no sense of kind of separation from them and their process and us and what we were doing, which I think is possibly why that film's quite intimate, or it feels quite intimate. So, and that people are sort of freaking out in meetings and stuff, which I think, had it been, you know, the BBC, everybody would have been like, we're all coming to a very nice decision, and it would have all been very polite, but because they were there and they were part of it, I think it was much more naked. So, but they were great, they were lovely and nice to be around and part of it all.
And when they finished the film, was there an opportunity for Greenham?
Yeah, I seem to remember seeing it very early on at the time. I think they came and they showed us it. So, yeah.
And so in terms of, you said there weren't conflict, we don't remember conflicts about actions that women did. Do you remember things that did require, like the money situation, or things that women did have to
The women, yeah, the things that people had conflict about were the money situation, which you saw in Carrie Greenham Home and was generally true, is that people came from different places about money and had different kind of responsibilities about money. Drugs probably were a big issue. People would talk about drugs.
Detail that for us.
So some women took drugs and some women didn't, and the people who didn't take drugs, some of whom didn't like the fact that there were drugs on the camp, or that, you know, they felt that that was an issue. Not so much in terms of like health, but more in terms of sort of safety for the camp and
was that
what it meant in terms of our presence in the world.
the reflection? And were there ever issues that arose out of women being drunk or stoned, or something happened that you remember?
No, I don't think so.
And what could you characterize for those that didn't see Carrie Greenham Home, or deeper than Carrie Greenham Home went, how the money situation was set up and where conflicts would have arisen?
I mean, we got a massive amount. What I remember is that we got a huge amount of donations, so a lot of money, and no real coherent plan as to how we were going to manage it, or who would have access to it and who wouldn't, and what the camp would agree to support and who would control it. And there's, you know, the original people who had come to the camp and set up the first bank account no longer lived at the camp, so there was no access to some of the money, and, you know, how do you resolve that, and what is it that people spend money on, and is the camp in support of that or not in support of it? If you give people to money which they then spend on dope, is that a problem, or isn't it a problem? Or do you give money and then money is power, and you give people power and what they do with it is what they do with it? So there were, I think, lots of discussions on that level, and there was a real effort to move away from having a central, one person as a leader or one person controlling things. But actually, the banks can't quite take that approach, so, you know, you have to somehow mediate that a bit, really. And like I said, we had a few women who had no access to any money at all, but were living at the camp, and so there was an agreement that they would have money. So
at Seneca, if you were arrested trespassing on the base, you would get a letter and be asked not to return, and the second time you could face jail charges. If you were arrested, as you said, more than a handful of times at Greenham, how did that process work? Were you arrested for each charge as it happened?
What I'm calling arrested is arrested and charged. So there were other times where I was just chucked out the back at midnight and had to walk home, and that kind of thing, where everybody was just fed up of filling up their police stations full of annoying women. So, but there were other times, the 5, 6, 7, I can't remember how many times that I was arrested and charged, I went to court for, and did some time in prison for some of them.
And so, but at Greenham, did they like compound? If you got arrested again, then they would add more time, or was it just you were charged for whatever that crime, whatever that time was, you did that time, and then it would be another thing the next time?
Yes, they're separate events.
And so what was the longest time you spent in prison? Was it that 2 weeks the first time?
2 weeks.
And the rest of the time it was?
7 days, 2 weeks, 7 days, that sort of thing. I think that obstruction and criminal damage were things like 7 days, I think.
And did the gates, as time went on, have different characteristics? Did Yellow Gate maintain its sort of role as the central sort of more administrative, maybe? Did the other gates have different roles?
The other gates had personalities, definitely.
Can you tell us about what they were?
So I think Main Gate was a bit urban, a bit sort of gritty, and Green Gate was in the woods and very pretty, and certainly when Green Gate first started, people used to go up to Green Gate just to take a little break in the woods, so it was more like a holiday. I mean, not that women weren't taking action and doing the whole thing there as well, but I think that sort of changed as that gate was used more. But Blue Gate was a bit more kind of alt. There's a kind of younger, kind of more trendy, hip crowd at Blue Gate. So they were all different.
And Orange Gate?
Orange Gate. I don't remember much about Orange Gate. I only kind of remember people, individual people. They're definitely sort of more mellow around the back. And then somebody opened up like Scarlet Gate, which wasn't really a gate. It was just sort of space along the back fence because we just felt there was a bit too long between one gate and the next. So there was a tiny camp there for a little while. But I wanted the life of Yellowgate. You know, there's a whole society there really. So I couldn't be going out to the back end to hang out at Scarlet Gate and sing songs to myself.
I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about evictions or the munchers that came, and so talk about that whole process, because was that a daily process, or it happened occasionally?
No, it happened very frequently. I don't know if it was always daily, but it happened very frequently. And I think the first one that I described earlier about the sort of big eviction removed or destroyed the kind of the more stable, long-standing kind of structures and how we use the space and all of that kind of thing. And then the daily or near daily ones were much more kind of unsettling and disruptive, kind of in an acute way, because you're constantly trying to hold on to your possessions and not have things thrown in the, you know, those big garbage trucks that chew everything up the munches. So yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because it was our home. It was, you know, I didn't have it, that was it. There was nowhere else. I wasn't living anywhere else. So this was my home and my life, and that was true probably for everybody who was there, really. It wasn't, you know, people's homes were destroyed regularly, really.
When you say they, who were they? It's the U.S.?
No, the US wasn't involved in it because this is outside of the base, and so they didn't have any jurisdiction outside of the base. So it was a process whereby it must have been the council who had, possibly in conjunction with the MOD, but the MOD weren't that involved, who had taken a possession order which meant that they could take our stuff and remove us and not have us live there. And it was the civilian police that were involved in enforcing it, but they came with bailiffs who were appointed by the courts to take stuff. So the bailiff has the power to remove property and evict.
Are we talking about, you know, like 10 women? Are we talking about 50 women being disrupted in that way? How many women were around at various campsites?
It was mostly the main gate that was evicted, which is my memory of it. Which was where I was living. Hopefully my memory isn't entirely selfish. I've forgotten everybody else was going through the same thing, but I think it was just the main gate that they were really focused on. And how many women? I mean, certainly 30 or 40 women were living there sort of permanently. So, yeah. I think they did evict up at Bluegate as well, actually. I think they did, because I remember my mum going to both places because she had a car and trying to help people by, you know, putting stuff in the car at Bluegate. So I think they did do lots of evictions up there, and because they were right on the corner of a main road. And
how long was your mother there?
Oh, I think she was probably there for 18 months, probably a couple of years, I would have thought, on and off, and then became involved in Nicaraguan Solidarity campaign and things like that. But yeah, she came and lived at the camp around about that time, 1984, I guess.
So with baby buggies or...
Baby buggies and shopping trolleys, and Beatrice, who lived at the camp at Yellowgate, tried to make a mobile bender, so she tried to attach shopping. We kind of cannibalised a shopping trolley and a pallet and tried to make something movable, but in fact it was so heavy that we couldn't move it, so we abandoned it as an idea. But yeah. So I think it was just a case of kind of, it was very unsettling.
They would dump your tea, take away your firewood.
They did take away our firewood, yeah, but there's always more firewood in the forest, so. I mean, I never felt that it was going to actually work as a way of getting rid of us. It didn't feel like they were even close to that. It was more of a kind of disruption and a kind of upheaval. And I think the first big one was upsetting because it really felt like losing homes, and their violence and the volume of police was quite extreme. The kind of ongoing, chronic, endless evictions were just more like something that you survived as part of daily life, but didn't quite feel so. I guess we got used to them.
Yeah. Did you and your mother do any actions together?
We did, yeah, we did. I can't even remember what the building was for. There was some building relatively near the fence that they were in the middle of. It was something to do with the silos, but it wasn't as far in as that. And they had given up trying to catch us by patrols, so they housed, I think, 3 or 4 geese there, because geese had traditionally been used to raise alarms because they always make a racket if they're disturbed, although I don't know who was out there listening. But anyway, there were these geese in the pen, and we'd spotted them walking as we walked between Main Gate and Green Gate. Everybody had spotted the geese, and we decided that we were going to liberate the geese. So me and my mum and I think Georgina, and there was somebody else, Leaf, and one other person, decided we were going to rescue the geese, and that we would be able to capture them and get away with the geese. And we had made this whole plan, and Georgina had soaked all these raisins in alcohol because the plan was to get the geese drunk, and if they were drunk we'd be able to get them out more easily, or they wouldn't honk or whatever it is that geese do. And we got to the fence and cut our way in and sort of made it to the geese, and who didn't make a noise and didn't eat the raisins either. They weren't interested in the raisins. And we got into the pen, and there's something with birds that if you tuck their heads under their wings and just rock them, they kind of just fall asleep. So we did that and stuffed them in some sacks, and then escaped over the edge of the gully. And the old folks, my mum and Georgina and Jean, I think, were over the edge already with the geese, and me and Leaf were behind and just kind of going down, and we got spotted. Well, we got spotted. They didn't get spotted. So then me and Leaf kind of sort of threw ourselves in as sacrificial arrest us distraction technique. I can't remember what we did, but we did a whole kind of like singing and running in the other direction, and got arrested, and they couldn't quite work in because there wasn't a hole anywhere nearby, but somehow didn't really think it through and arrested me and her and took us to the police station. Meanwhile, the other 3 managed to make their way out with the geese and took them to Newbury and put them in the canal in Newbury, and they just swam off. Wow. I don't even think I might have got charged for that. It might have been another one where they just thought, just let them go. But anyway, yeah, we got the geese out. They weren't very good guard geese after all.
Did more geese show up the next day?
No more geese. That was the end of the geese. And I think we put sort of rude signs up by the gate about honk if for peace and that sort of thing, just to wind them. And I think various people went up to the gate and asked about the geese, and had people seen the geese and where were the geese, and so I think we tormented them quite a bit about their geese. Yeah, so that was one action we did together. I think we probably did a few blockades and stuff, but that's one I particularly remember that was quite a laugh.
Wow. Did you ever fear for your physical safety at Greenham?
No, I didn't, but I think that's probably because at that point in my life I was pretty much immortal, so I didn't really kind of, I was young and relatively fearless, and I didn't ever think anything bad would happen. Or I mean, they were a bit extreme sometimes, the police, and that's sort of frightening in the moment. It's alarming in the moment more than frightening maybe, but I never thought anything terrible would happen to me. I think sometimes when you're in those kind of blockades where it all goes a bit mad and they start throwing people around, you are slightly anxious about other people, but I don't ever remember being that fearful, really.
What about any type of microwave radiation, or what came to be known as zapping? Were you ever aware of that at Greenham?
People talked about it a lot. A lot of people talked about it. I personally never felt any effects from it at all. I think I'm quite coarsely made, so the rays didn't get me. But yeah, people did definitely talked about it, and I think some women felt that they were deeply affected by it, headaches and confusion, or sort of lack of concentration, I think, and stuff like that. But from my point of view, no, I didn't really feel it.
And as a time frame, were they talking about that your early years at Greenham, or in the later?
It was later. It was definitely later. Yeah.
And are there any other little stories about Greenham in their first and second times before we go back to Seneca that you want to tell us? Memories of actions or moments, or?
No, only that I loved it. I stayed because I loved it, and you know, it was a whole life, really. It was a life that I loved, and a growing up that I was so privileged to have, you know, to kind of leave school and actually grow up somewhere where I was surrounded by lesbians and people who were talking about different things, and to be so free. I felt so free that I could just get up in the morning and do anything I wanted, and as a young adult that was intoxicating and a blessing, really.